The Great Depression, setting the scene for Bud Not Bunny. Famous photos. What can you infer about the time period of the Great Depression from these famous photographs from the era? Please take your time and look at each one. What was the Great Depression? The causes of the Great Depression are widely debated. There was no single cause, but several things when working together made it happen. A weak banking system, overproduction of goods, overspending, and bursting credit bubble were just some of the reasons. The Wall Street crash of 1929 was one of the main causes of the Great Depression. The stock market crash was the most devastating crash in the history of the United States. On Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, the stock market lost $14 billion, making the loss for that week an astonishing $30 billion. It took 23 years for the stock market to hit the high it was at before the crash. As news of the stock market crash spread, customers rushed to their banks to withdraw their money, causing disasters, bank runs. People who had been very wealthy lost everything they had. Many companies went out of business, and huge numbers of people lost their jobs. At the peak of the Depression, 1 of every 4 people were without a job. Between 1930 and 1935, nearly 750,000 farms were lost through bankruptcy or sheriff sales. Flint, Michigan. Please take a second and look at that map. Michigan was home to the automotive industry. In 1903, the Ford Motor Company was founded in Michigan. During World War I, Michigan filled a huge demand for military vehicles. The Great Depression caused severe economic hardships in Michigan, as thousands of auto industry workers were dismissed. People suffered sooner and more severely than the rest of the nation. By 1933, nearly 50% of the state's non-agricultural workforce was unemployed, which was almost twice as high as the national rate. Missions during the Great Depression. Bread lines. During the Great Depression, thousands of unemployed residents who could not pay their rent or mortgages were evicted into the world of public assistance and bread lines. Unable to find work and seeing that each job they applied for had hundreds of seekers, these men wandered aimlessly without funds, begging, picking over refuse in city dumps, and finally getting up the courage to stand to be seen publicly in a bread line for free food. To accommodate them, charities, missions, and churches began programs to feed them. Men who experienced the waiting in line recall the personal shame of asking for a handout, unable to care for oneself or to provide for others. Soup kitchens. Soup kitchens are places where food is served to the hungry. They were first set up by the private organizations and churches, and eventually the government began to operate them. Families struggled to put food on the table, and many resorted to soup kitchens for daily meals. The increased rate of impoverished citizens called for a lot of charitable food organizations like these soup kitchens. Began around 1929 as an effect of the Great Depression. Governmental unemployment relief was non-existent or inadequate. Notorious Al Capone is credited with opening the first soup kitchen. Hooversville. What was a Hooverville? The name for a shanty town or tent city during the Great Depression. These were areas of temporary residence for the unemployed where people would sleep anything from open piano crates to the ground. Police occasionally removed occupants of Hoovervilles for trespassing on private property, but they were frequently tolerated. How did Hoovervilles get their name? Americans looked to the federal government for help during the Depression. However, the 31st President, Herbert Hoover, who took office in March 1929, believed that self-reliance and self-help, not government intervention, were the best means to meet citizens' needs. He believed the country would recover if people would just help one another. Americans continued to believe government assistance was needed. They used Hoover's name because they were frustrated and disappointed with his involvement in the relief of the Depression. What else was named after Hoover? Several other terms came into use during this era, such as Hoover blanket, old newspapers used as blanketing, Hoover flag, an empty pocket turned inside out, Hoover leather, cardboard used to line a shoe with the sole worn through, Hoover wagon, a car with horses tied to it because the owner could not afford gasoline. Hooverville fast facts. Varied in size from a few hundred people to the size of a city. Built near rivers for a convenient water source. typically grim and unsanitary. Most residents were unemployed, but would take any backbreaking work that was available. Riding the rails. What was riding the rails? Thousands of men and boys would catch trains heading out west. Many traveled together in small groups. Very common during the Depression. Why? To seek employment, shame over family life, or seeking adventure. Dangers associated with the rails. Train. Between the years of 1930 and 1939, it is estimated that approximately 24,000 people were killed and 27,000 were injured on the railroad property running to catch the train. Brutal train guards called bulls were hired to make sure only paying customers got aboard. Conditions were also poor. Diseases transmitted, lack of cleanliness, eating spoiled and unsanitary food. Solution to the problem. Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, enacted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, to curb the amount of runaways and railroad passengers. Unemployed and unmarried men ages 18 to 25 could enroll. They were paid $30 a month to work in national forests and parks. This helped the issue, but it did not eliminate the issue entirely. Labor unions during the Great Depression. What is a labor union? An organization association of workers, often by trade or profession, formed to protect and further their rights and interests. Purpose of labor unions: better safety conditions, higher employment wages. Labor unions and the Great Depression. Often during times of economic depression, labor unions are not as prosperous. Membership in unions fell to 3 million in 1933 compared to 5 million members in the previous decade. Employers did not like unions. They threatened lockouts and blacklisting and pressuring workers from joining unions. New Deal and unions. Prior to FDR's New Deal, employers could prevent employees from joining unions. However, when employees became free to join unions, it gave more power to the unions. New Deal. National Labor Relations Act of 1935 gave workers the right to join unions and to bargain collectively through union representation.